What's up guys, KalipezTech here, coming back at you with another video. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Samsung Galaxy A02s. Let's get started. So before we get into the phone itself, let's take a look at what comes in the box. So in here, we have this little quick start booklet. We got a USB-C cable, a wall adapter, a pair of 3.5mm headphones, and a SIM card removal tool. Now the phone itself has a 6.5-inch PLS IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 270, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen to body ratio of 81.8%. Right now I have the brightness at 100% and I would say it looks pretty good. Up here we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera, and this camera is 5 megapixels. Not the best, but definitely not the worst I've seen. Overall, the phone has a nice, sleek, modern design, and the back is made of a harder material with a matte finish, and it doesn't really pick up fingerprints. For storage, this phone is getting 64 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion, but keep in mind there is another variant out there that only has 32 gigabytes. That's not this one. This phone in my hand right now does have 64 gigabytes. So just be aware of that difference. Now 64 gigabytes is definitely a good amount. In this price range, a lot of the phones, in fact, I want to say the majority of them have only 32 gigabytes of internal storage. There are only really a couple, including this phone, that do have 64. And I think 64 is much better, even if you're not going to use all 64 gigabytes. If you're just a more light or even average user, you're probably not going to come close. But it's better to have that storage than not have it, because apps are getting larger and larger and the system takes a good amount of space itself. So just to be on the safe side, having more storage is always good. And if you're more of a power user, this is definitely going to be more of a necessity to you, because when you have a lot of apps, lots of photos and videos and that sort of thing on the phone, then even with the microSD card expansion, it is going to add up pretty fast. You know, there aren't really very many external features on this phone. There's no wireless charging, no fingerprint scanner, no face unlock, no NFC. So it is a really basic device as far as that goes. If those are features that are important to you, definitely keep that in mind. Now, I wish that this phone had at least a fingerprint scanner, because that's such a basic feature and so many phones in this price range have that feature already. So it would make sense for this phone to have it too. One of this phone's predecessors, the Samsung Galaxy A01, did have at least face unlock. Now granted, this is not the A02, this is the A02s, so there is that difference to be aware of, but still it is a really similar phone, and this is a newer generation, so I would think that they would at least leave an older feature on there that was convenient, because now you actually have to enter a PIN or a password or a pattern, none of which is nearly as easy and convenient as face unlock or a fingerprint scanner. On the back here, we got a triple camera setup with a 13 megapixel rear camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. So not quite the best, but also not the worst either. Here's a picture taken with the rear camera of the phone. As you can see here, it's definitely not bad, but there's also a lot to be desired if you're trying to take pictures that are super high quality. I would say if you're more of a casual user of the camera, this is going to be perfectly fine, and it's definitely better than the vast majority of phones in this price range. It's going to be good for everyday use, nothing really special, maybe a post on social media here and there, and stuff like Snapchat and that sort of thing. But if you're taking pictures for more professional use, like a website or something, then you might want to look at a different device, because I don't think the quality of this camera is quite at that level. Here's a picture with the macro camera. Now, I'm not a big macro camera user myself, but I do think that this macro camera is at least decent. One thing I wish this phone did have is an ultra wide camera, because there are lots of phones at this price range and below that do have an ultra wide camera. It's a really useful feature, honestly, probably quite a bit more useful than a macro camera. So many different real life applications for an ultra wide camera. So I really wish that this phone did have one. One thing this phone does have is portrait mode in both the rear and the front cameras. Portrait mode is a really popular feature that's standard in most phones these days. There are several phones in this price range that don't have it. So again, I'm glad this phone does. As far as video goes, we can shoot in qualities up to 1080p in the rear and front cameras. Nothing out of the ordinary there. But again, if you are shooting videos for more professional purposes, then I would say you might be a little bit disappointed in the quality of the video on this phone. It's not the greatest, although it's not the worst either. Just doing a quick video sample with the Samsung Galaxy A02s. We are shooting in 1080p right now. Also keep in mind the audio quality. So that was just a quick video sample with this phone. I will let the quality of the video speak for itself. You can decide whether or not that is good enough for you. But again, this phone is able to shoot in qualities up to 1080p in both the rear and the front cameras. Internally, the Samsung Galaxy A02s is getting 4GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 450 processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone and it came back with a single core score of 129 and a multi-core score of 488. So this is really not going to be able to do a ton more than your basic activities like sending text messages, making calls, browsing the web, maybe some light social media use. But if you want to do more high-end activities like photo and video editing and high-performance gaming, you're definitely going to run into some trouble because this phone's not really equipped for that kind of thing. It's definitely meant for activities more on the lower end of the spectrum and not a whole lot else. Then again, the fact that this phone does have 4GB of RAM is a little bit of an advantage over a lot of other entry-level phones because I've seen a lot of phones at this level only have 2 or 3GB of RAM, sometimes as little as 1. So having more RAM is going to allow you to do certain things a little bit better, like web browsing, going on social media is a big one, and multitasking. That sort of thing is really going to benefit from having a little bit more RAM than other phones in this range. Now the battery on this phone is probably the best feature about it. This phone has a 5000 milliamp hour battery that supports 15 watt fast charging, so it's definitely more impressive. Not only are you going to have a lot of life per charge, but you're also going to have longevity down the road when other phones with smaller batteries start to wear out. This phone, since the battery is so much bigger, is probably still going to have quite a bit of life left in it. So if you prefer to get a phone and keep it for a longer period of time without having to replace it, this is going to be a good thing for you. And of course, the fast charging doesn't hurt either. Now that we've gone over some of the specs of the phone, let's take a closer look at the hardware. On the left side right here, we have the slot for the SIM card and the micro SD card. On the right side, we have our volume keys and our power button. On the top, we got the noise canceling microphone. On the bottom, we have a 3.5mm headphone jack, the microphone, a USB-C charging port, and the speaker. On the back, we have our camera setup and our flash. There's a Samsung logo right here at the bottom, and that's pretty much it. Now, in conclusion, my final thoughts on this phone, I wouldn't say this phone is great or awful at anything, but for what it is, being a really entry-level phone, it's pretty decent at everything. It doesn't have above average processing power. It doesn't have an amazing camera. It doesn't really have an amazing display either, but everything on it is pretty much good for the level it's at. Most entry-level phones aren't going to be better or worse than this. The one area where this phone really has a huge advantage is the battery. This battery is actually bigger than a lot of flagship phones. For example, the iPhone 12 has a 2815 milliamp hour battery. So this phone's battery is actually almost double the size of that. But for everything else, this phone is pretty much about average. I would say it's a real solid option if you are looking for an entry-level phone to do more basic activities with, because for the price, there might be some phones out there that have a feature or two that's a lot better than the equivalent on this phone. But at the same time, where one area of one phone is better, there's probably gonna be a few features that are worse. So as far as this phone goes, its specs are not really amazing. I'm not insanely impressed by anything specifically besides the battery, because the battery is really good. But I would say it's a really well-rounded phone and definitely a safe bet if you're looking for an entry-level device. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.